It's a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm not an economist. I'm not an analyst. I've been in transportation for 32 years. Transportation has always been a leading indicator in economic times. It gives you a forecast of what's to come. Most of you and the consumers in the U.S. felt the impact of the recession in 2008, 2009. In transportation, we felt the effects of that in the beginning of about the third quarter of 2006. So we saw that coming long before everyone else did. So as I talk today, I'm going to talk about what we're seeing today in transportation and logistics and what to expect in the future. Well, obviously, the recession created a lot of changes in transportation and logistics over the last 5 years. But I can tell you today, capacity is tightening up. And when I say capacity, I'm talking about the fact that there's more demand for the supply that's out there. So now that capacity is tightening up, we're starting to see better pricing from a carrier or logistic company's point of view. And you might think, well, that's good that demand is greater than supply. That means the economy is coming back and things are improving. And we are seeing that occurring to a slight degree. But we serve over 35,000 customers throughout the United States, and I can tell you that most of my customers are cautiously optimistic about what they're seeing going into 2012 and what they are planning for into 2012. The real reason that we're seeing capacity tightening up is because the supply has changed. The number of carriers that are currently operating in the United States has dropped in the last 5 years by several thousand carriers, which means there's several thousands of tractors, trailers, and terminals that are no longer in use and no longer available to be in use. So that supply has gone down. The primary reason is because of what's occurred over the last 5 years in terms of fuel prices, cost, and the fact that there's been such a great supply of transportation opportunities out there that pricing has gone to an all-time low, which put several carriers out of business because they can no longer compete in their marketplace, especially when fuel price went up. So that capacity has been taken out of the industry. Fleet size has been reduced, and all carriers that are currently operating are not adding to their fleets. They're maximizing their assets and putting as much freight on those assets as they possibly can without replacing or adding to their fleet. Now, they will replace worn-out equipment, but they're not adding above that. So their capital expenditure is much lower than it has been in years past. And the average fleet age in the industry is at the highest level it's ever been. So that tells you that those logistics providers and carriers are trying to get the maximum utilization out of their assets. One of the biggest reasons that the capacity is tightened up and that supply has gone down is the fact that in our industry, the driver pool has been impacted. You used to measure capacity by the number of doors that a terminal or companies have, the number of tractors and trailers that are available on the road. Today, companies are measuring capacity by the number of drivers that they have in their driver pool. Over the years in our industry, the driver pool has been significantly impacted. We have an older workforce. Those older drivers retire, die off, whatever. They go away. And there's not a lot of people going into transportation to become drivers. That's been an ongoing problem. And through the last 5 years, it wasn't a big problem because the economy had downturned so much that we didn't need those drivers. Well, now that the economy is starting to spike back up, the need for drivers exists greater than it ever has. The fact that there are fewer drivers is really having an impact on the overall transportation and logistics industry. The problem with that is it's been exacerbated by what's going on in our industry with regard to government oversight and government regulations. In recent years, you've had CSA, which stands for Compliance, Safety, and Accountability, which has an impact on the safety ratings of various different transportation companies as well as the individual driver. That has driven several drivers out of the workforce. Hours of service rule regulation changes that have been debated over the last several years are should be finalized this year. Those are also having an impact on the productivity of the drivers that are out there available to drive, forcing more drivers out of the industry. The utilization of electronic onboard recorders. Those are not mandated yet, but in future years, more than likely, every truck that's on the highway will have an electronic onboard recorder. That would be like every one of you having a GPS on you and your boss would know where you're at 100% of the time. Most drivers don't like that, and that will, again, drive more drivers out of the industry. And then most recently, you've had changes in the National Labor Relations Board. There were a few recess appointments that just took place. Those recess appointments were very pro-union appointees, which means for all manufacturers and anyone that has a non-union workforce that wants to keep a workforce non-union, which most transportation companies do, it now becomes much more easy for unionization to take place because of the rule changes that will probably occur in the next few years. Again, driving down the utilization and the ability to recruit drivers into the industry. And then lastly, in terms of capacity, as I said earlier, companies are not out there expanding their capital expenditures. They are bringing on equipment to replace needed replacement of equipment, but they're not expanding and growing, and they will not until they see the economy come back to where they know that they can get maximum utilization out of those assets and make a profit on those trucks. And again, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, they have not been able to do that. So as capacity tightens up, pricing gets much better, those carriers will then start to invest in growing their assets. The next trend we're seeing in transportation is diversification. We continue to see companies expand their portfolio of services. My company alone has gone from, as Dan said, a single service provider of LTL, long-haul LTL, to multiple services that we provide for our customers. Our long-haul LTL used to be 100% of the business. Today, it's only 50% of our business. Companies have diversified. We've made 13 acquisitions in the last 5 years, and more of that's taking place. So when you have mergers and acquisitions taking place in an industry, again, you'll see downsizing of the supply that's out there. And it makes those companies that much more well-rounded to serve the shipper's needs. We expect to see continued M&A throughout the industry over the course of the next several years. And lastly, the third trend that we're seeing is a transition to more intermodal utilization. Intermodal is putting freight on trailers that go on the rail. What we found out through the recession is a lot of customers are more than willing to get their transit time reduced or increased by a day or 2 or 3 to take advantage of a lower cost, because companies were not worried about just-in-time service, they were worried about staying in business. So that taught the industry that you can put freight on the rail at a slower pace, but you can do it cheaper and maintain your profit levels. So we see that transition more and more to an intermodal utilization. And in today's trucking environment, you're going to see everything that you have, everything that's in this room, at some point in time moved by truck. But at some point in the transit life of that freight is now going to probably touch the rails at some point in time. We continue to expect capacity to improve in the industry, which means pricing will continue to improve for those carriers that are still in business. We expect 2012 to gradually get better from beginning to end. So we expect the second half of 2012 to improve over the first half. We expect to see improvement not only on a quarter-to-quarter basis, but on a month-to-month basis as well. So we're very optimistic about the direction that we're seeing the industry go, given the last 5 years of very difficult times in our industry. And what that means for the consumer is, over time, the economy should be improving, although that pricing is going to go up and the cost of moving those goods is going to go higher. And again, that cost will be passed on to the shipper and to the end consumer. That is a very positive indicator for what we expect to occur in the overall industry. And according to what we see, and barring any geopolitical or any major events, any huge spikes in fuel, we would expect this trend to continue and move on through 2012. We actually expect 2013 and 2014 to be much better than 2012, but we believe that we're in the beginnings of a very nice movement, a nice improvement in where the economy is going from this point forward. Thank you.